Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, spanning the world from the Seattle area where it's lunchtime, afternoon on the East Coast, evening in Europe, and very early morning in Asia and Australia. Thank you, as always, for joining us on the weekly webinar. This is a really cool one. I'm digging into the well of the SMB Consulting Best Practices book. Let me see if I can grab one of those and bring that up to show you the infamous book from '03. And I'm in the process of updating that book. So there'll be some of the content today reflects this updates. We'll keep you posted on that. Let's jump right into the deck. The agenda will be introductions, a little bit of housekeeping, the content from the Find Your Minder Grinder model, and then take your questions. And one of the gentlemen I'm introducing on the next slide, I believe that's him in the photo.
Just from the
Over to the left.
backside. Not my
Yeah.
best side, but definitely me.
I'll introduce you in a second, Michael, but just for a point of reference, everybody, SureWeb has joined us today, and we had a little bit of fun, golly gee, almost a month ago, right before the Super Bowl down in Fort Lauderdale at IT Expo, and that's where that was taken. And there's a
Correct.
blog up on our site. Yeah, Michael, there's a blog on our site where we talk about cause marketing, which is what you were doing with the drop a card and we'll donate to Habitat for Humanity. With that said, Michael, why don't you go first and introduce yourself since you're in the photo, and then we'll bring
Excellent.
in Danny Brown. Go ahead, Michael.
Perfect. So, hi guys, I'm Mike Slater. I'm the subject matter expert about everything VoIP, telecom, PBX, UCaaS related at SureWeb. I work closely with the sales team. I'm an external speaker and generally the go-to guy for everything related to VoIP over at SureWeb.
There we go. Danny Brown used to be here in
Hi,
Seattle. I used to see you in Seattle. Now you're in Austin, Texas. Introduce
that's right.
yourself, my friend.
Hello, everybody. I'm Danny Brown, Head of Business Development Alliances at SureWeb. My team and I are responsible for working with the most strategic and largest accounts, as well as interface with individuals such as Harry and the rest of the MSP community.
All righty. Hey, Danny, quick question. I know I've told you I'm going to target South by Southwest for a few days at mid-March. Are you in Austin for South by Southwest?
Of course, can't miss that at all.
There you go. And boy, what at 300,000 people? That's quite it's a big party. I've heard.
It is indeed. It is a once in a lifetime experience. If you're have nothing else better to do and you want to have some excitement, this is a place to be.
There we go. All right, let's jump into it. So use the questions feature on your control panel to ask your questions. Jenny's going to monitor that because I'm live on screen. Keep an eye out on chat for resources. That's where I tend to put links or comments. Excuse me, folks. Been fighting hard to fight off that cold all winter. I think I'm successful. Um, I want to draw your attention to the MSP makeover contest that expires into March. Go to SMB Nation, page down to the analytics and analysis row of news, and then join the contest. There's an article on it. And then the other thing would be Microsoft 365. Excuse me. I'm going to shake that. M365 Nation. I would offer, we silently launched it in Q1. We're building momentum, having daily calls with our contributors, and it's a new community with new content for SMB Nation and way members, and then way beyond SMB up through enterprise, IT pro, government, etc. And then the show I wanted to highlight, of course, was South by Southwest, mid-March in Austin, Texas, and I'll be reporting from there. So let's jump into it with the Finder conversation. So here's the story, is that with the book I wrote and the book I'm updating, the conversation was rules of 12. And the idea was every author needs a thesis, every preacher needs a pulpit. And so I developed this 15 years ago that we could get our arms around. How can we describe the flow of business? there's a couple ways to do it. Let me go back. The finder minder is get the business. The finder is get the business. The minder is manage the business, and the grinders do the work. Basic professional services model. So we're going to talk finder. And one of the updates to the book I have is LinkedIn lookalikes. And if you look closely at my LinkedIn profile, or you want to pop over on your screen number 2 and do it, you'll see that we have Paul Dipple, who's a well-known player in the MSP space, and then Dave Seibert. And they automatically show up on the right of my LinkedIn profile in terms of what other people were looking for relative to myself. And what I found is that's predictive, right? I would call this behavioral, right? It's not necessarily mathematics, although I guess at the end of the day, it is kind of machine learning that's actually doing this with an algorithm over at LinkedIn. But let's treat it as behavioral. And if you were trying to sell me, one of our SMB Nation members down in Florida has a side gig on annuities. He has a financial background, an insurance background, and he's doing what he has to do to make it as an MSP and so on. So one of his side gigs is annuities as an investment. Don't you think this gentleman would be interested in looking at my LinkedIn profile and seeing Paul Dipple and Dave Seibert and then targeting them? Because very quickly, if you click through and you look at their background, essentially we're lookalikes or nearest next door neighbors for the purposes of this conversation. And you can, to some extent, automate this if you use Sales Navigator inside LinkedIn. Now, the problem with Sales Navigator that I've had historically is it's not inexpensive. It's if you pay a year up front. Last time I did it, and full disclosure, I need to renew. The cobbler's shoes, and the auto mechanic's car, if you will. But you can do this for free. And if you click into Paul Dipple and Dave Seibert, you're going to see that we share a lot in common. I suspect we have some similarities in terms of educational attainment, certainly career path and work experience, maybe external achievements, some certifications, and so on. And we all intuitively do this. A far-fetched example would be Match.com, and that's essentially what you're doing on Match.com in your own personal life, if the shoe literally fits for that. But it's basically lookalike analysis, right? You have your personas of somebody you'd like to spend time with, and then you target those personas. But Michael and Danny, that's probably not coming off. Does that sound a little creepy?
No, not at all. I mean, when I take a look at it, I think you also forgot one factor that also
Sure.
matters a lot too, which is the shared connections, right? Because it's also how the algorithm will pick up. So if you're connected in the MSP space as like a speaker, a talker, someone that deals a lot with, you will start to become involved in that group. For example, for me in the last 12 months working at SureWeb, I've shifted from the telecom side of things more into the MSP space. So my lookalikes that I see are more in line with the space I'm in now than the space I was in a year ago.
Yeah. And thank you, by the way. Contacts are a funny thing. And I'm glad you brought that up because yes, look at shared contacts. Absolutely. What has happened with LinkedIn over the years, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, is people have gotten wiser about masking their full contact list. And some people still haven't made that keystroke. And boy, howdy, you can go see 500 people that are linked to somebody that's a lookalike, a target. But Michael, you don't see that as much anymore, with privacy and GDPR and just the new world we live in. Is that fair enough?
Very true.
And so when I say rules of 12, a rule of 12, this is quarterly. So I want you to go find 12 lookalikes per quarter. And I always like to say that's sort of a gentleman's quarter, if you will. A quarter is actually slightly longer, of course, than 12 weeks, but we're going to let you have a week for admin or to go to an event or do something. So per quarter, 12 lookalikes, just something that we can manage and go ahead and reach out to them. This also fits with Sales Navigator, right? If you throw a couple shekels to LinkedIn, you're going to do a little bit more, but LinkedIn with Sales Navigator will let you solicit people that you may not be allowed to otherwise communicate with, a limited number of passes or tokens, if you will. Rule of 12, educational sales. And I view it this way, that again, once a week, if we can agree on that, I need you to do a little bit of competitive research. It's all fair in love and war. We all do it. Trade shows are the worst. They're a den of thieves because your competitors are walking around talking to you. Michael, you know what I'm saying, brother? Some of those people that walk up to your booth at IT Expo may not actually be your target audience.
Yes, I'm aware of that, but maybe not all the salespeople are. But yes, you're 100% correct.
And I want you to read articles. And, the funny thing about reading is there's been some new research. There's been some new conversations about CEOs and leaders. And believe it or not, we don't read, right? And reading is an asset. And when I say reading, well, certainly one of my books, but more importantly, I was just presented with the new Microsoft 365 for Dummies book yesterday via Kindle. It's Jen Reed, who's a friend of the family up here in Seattle, and I'm going to interview her tomorrow. So I'm using my Kindle madly to scroll down and get some talking points. But you know what? Microsoft 365 for Dummies, I get nuggets out of it, right? As I'm going along, it's like, I didn't know that. And that's the beautiful thing about reading. And then finally, with educational sales, and I'm going to get to this on the next slide, a lot of this leads to engagement. And I'm going to come back to LinkedIn and talk about scoring and engagement, but read articles on LinkedIn and you get credit for it. So we're gonna talk about that. Gentlemen, I'm assuming you're voracious readers on the weekend. You have a stack of books.
Exactly. Not only do we read on the
sure.
weekends, but we traveling as well. We travel every week.
Yeah,
It's true.
Yeah. Reading is a lost art, literally. And I throw it all into educational sales because there's two kinds of lobbyists in the world. We're essentially all lobbyists, and there's the juicers down in Olympia, the state of Washington capital, and the juicers give you money. Okay, so Mr. Legislator, here is money. Then there's the subject matter experts, right? And those are lobbyists that come in with industry expertise. And I'll give you a really good example of that. Michael, maybe you can catch what I'm throwing, but it would concern telecom and intralata and interlata and intralata and regulation from landlines in a VoIP world. I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about that, but the legislative bodies were way behind on regulation coming out of landlines to VoIP, and you lived in that world.
Yeah, I mean, and again, because that's part of the issue with it, especially with technology, and this is an issue that we face even in Canada, which again, maybe you don't have too many subscribers or too many people listening from there, but how do you deal with Netflix? Everybody up here wants to tax it because it's a US-based company broadcasting into Canada. And the question is, how do you deal with disruptive technology? And the answer is the government is always about 5 years behind the best way to actually do it. And by the time they figure it out, there's another technology that's disrupting in a different way. And that's the way it's always been in telecom.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I would like everyone today to leave the webinar thinking in terms of educational sales instead of car salesman. The next rule's really self-apparent, and actually the next two rules relate to each other. And so rule of 12, business cards. Once a week, give a business card. Once a week, collect a business card. It's a base hit. Not asking for home runs. And then part and partial to that would be meetups. And again, that's one of the updates to my book is the '03 book. We talked about user group meetings, and there was a time and a place for enthusiastic user group meetings. For whatever reason, that paradigm shifted, and now they're called meetups, and they're quite good. Meetup.com, and you can find topics of interest in your community. And so I am saying once a week, and this is a challenge, but I need you to be thinking about going to an event. Gentlemen, I guess we could include maybe an online event. It's not quite the same as giving and receiving a business card, but it would be educating yourself. I propose a motion that we allow online events to count for the once a week.
Well, for me, how I view that too is, once a week, produce something relevant that is in the public eye, be it a LinkedIn post, be it go to like a Reddit and talk to the MSP community, do something. For me personally, I try to answer one question pro bono on certain telecom communities I'm part of, right? Somebody walks in, they have a question, they can't figure it out. So I go in, no sales pretense, just what's your issue? Let's talk it out. Here's the fix. And for me, that's outreach, right? So it's visible to the entire community I'm a part of, and it builds trust.
Yep. Yeah, everything helps everything. And then here's the one, and Michael in particular, I welcome the dialogue. So we're talking telephony, making calls. And, it's easy to say phones are irrelevant, phones are old school, but what you see on the screen is a chart from a large Microsoft vendor called CSG Services, and I helped them a couple years ago for 6 months. I came in to tell my version of the truth on the channel and vendors and partners and so on. And it was a really cool gig because at the end of the day, CSG are call centers, is a number of call centers worldwide. So they span each time zone, Philippines, Puerto Rico, and so on, and Europe. And they are the call center for the Microsoft Partner Program. There's another vendor called N3 that assists them, but they have it down, and they're a long-time Microsoft vendor. So, folks, when you used to get those calls on the small business specialist community back in the day, that was what we call a VDASH, or a vendor slash permatemp from CSG, calling you once a month, asking how it's going. Now, that said, you get 93% voicemails, disconnects, or hangups. Those were the metrics we're playing with, which makes teleservices expensive. However, and this is a CSG report, I do believe in tele, and it does. Studies have shown it results in a 45% increase in opportunities because, in my opinion, it's a touch, right? With voicemail transcription, you appear in their inbox. It's a touch. Michael, you lived in the belly of that beast. Do you believe in telecom?
Thing is, I believe in the evolution of telecom, which is slightly different, right? So, because historically, if you go into what we talked a little bit earlier, which was the car salesmanship, right? That's the classic motto. You make 100 calls, you get 30 leads, you get 10 appointments, you get 5 proposals, you get 1 deal. That kind of doesn't really exist anymore, right? Because I'm a believer in Mark from Neural Impact. I think you met him at our show, right, Harry?
Yeah. Yep.
And he talks a lot about how the buying process, everything's already done by the time you talk to a salesperson now. You've picked your brand for the most part. Now you're just sorting out the details. So I think that the phone is still relevant, though, because a lot of those details at this point, it's not an exploratory call as much as you're articulating your plan, your solution. And that's something that's hard to do over an email, because especially with more complex product sales, you can't really explain over a 5-minute phone call, right? This is multiple calls. This is multiple conversations. And you really have to prove your own value and answer things in real time to really push anything forward. So I would argue that the volume has decreased, but the quality has overall gone up. And that's the reason why people are saying that, getting someone on the phone and getting more value of that conversation is paramount to having a good sales cycle as an MSP, at least from what I've seen.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, this is probably the best slide for a quick shout out about the product that SureWeb offers to MSPs in the unified communication area, and then we'll get the click link in tomorrow's thank you notification.
Mhm.
But who wants to tackle that? Michael, what's your pitch? And it's all fair. What's SureWeb doing to assist in the UC/telecom area?
For MSP specifically?
Yeah, MSPs.
So kind of what our play is, what our value is on the UCaaS space is you're basically doing three things. So the first thing you're doing is you're taking back control over something that either hasn't been in your control or is something that's threatening your business. Because the
Yep.
first thing you'll notice is carriers especially are moving into the productivity space, right? Carriers are
Right.
massive, publicly driven companies, and they're always looking for new revenue sources. So just because you assume the telephone is the safe ornament on the desk, it is still a very big financial hook that a potential competitor has, right, set to
Yep.
your office. The other factor I look at is the conversion technology, right? So much like everything else that we deal with at SureWeb, you know, the technology is all becoming the same. It's all controlled by underlying IP switching, right? We're sending packets of data back and forth, just like emails. The same principles work for phone calls now. So the expectation for the customer is, if you are doing all of this stuff already, why aren't you doing this? So it's another reason why. The last bit of opportunity is just the prevalence of Microsoft, right, in the space. I mean, Microsoft is spending billions of dollars in the cloud space right now trying
Yeah.
to drive adaptation. So instead of you trying to go in there and sell just telephony, which again is somewhat commoditized and everybody's doing it,
Right.
Harry, me and you've been doing this forever,
Yep.
why not hitch your wagon to a $100 billion marketing effort behind Teams, behind Skype for Business, leverage those names,
Yep.
and sell something that people will recognize and know that's integrated into a product they already trust. So again, smart buyers already have their minds made up. If they're already sold on your Microsoft offering and you want to tie the telephone in there, it's a much harder conversation than starting from scratch with another product.
Yep. Thank you. We move on. Another rule of 12 is I'm offering be in the top 12% of your industry. This is a modification. Now, guys, understand, essentially the book for those latecomers that I'm updating. So this was my famous book in '03, SMB Consulting Best Practices. What do you know? 15 years went by. It'll be out shortly, probably about the same size. And this book is basically a PhD thesis. I just never presented it to McGill University of Montreal. I suppose I should. It's a fine
Probably.
college. And when you get a PhD, you got to do something unique, right? I mean, come on.
True.
It says rules of 12. And so what I'm saying, just bear with me. Headhunters love to say when you get a cold call from a headhunter, that Harry, I've been tracking you for a while, and you're in the top 10% of your peer group. You're exactly what my client's looking for. And then of course I say I'm not looking, and then they only sell harder. They're like, that's exactly the kind of person I'm looking for. I don't want someone that's job hunting.
I love it.
Guys, I know. And so you're going to hear the top 10% of your peer group, and there's some truth to that. And there's a community out of Austin, Texas, as a matter of fact, called the 20. Danny, I don't know if you've know Tim Conkle at the 20 in Austin, or have had the pleasure of
I know
meeting
the
him.
20 group. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
so they're basically saying the 20%, but fair enough. 10, 20, 12. But what I want you to do is Google the LinkedIn SSI, okay? And it's a real rude analytical measurement. And we've had this talk at SMB Nation before, that we are at the early stages of the analytics era, okay? So just 5.25-inch floppy disk, stick with us, okay? In 10 years, it's all going to make sense. But what LinkedIn has tried to do is have a very basic scoring model. And where I come up, where my challenge is not so much some of the things I do and post and linking to people and all that. It's that third category down, engage with insights. And Michael, I think you were starting to go there, and I was going there on the last slide, that's part of reading is engagement. And you can read on LinkedIn and you can comment. I mean, go for it, dude. You get it. Let's talk engagement.
So I guess for me, what it's always going to come down to is, it's very easy to be reactive in these communities, right? You see a post goes up, somebody says cold calling is dead, and then the internet fight commences, right? It's
Right.
very easy to be that guy. What it really takes is a lot of thought leadership is to go in there and say, well, I don't think cold calling is nearly dead. I think it's this way, and here's my reason why. So it takes a lot of courage, and that's the hardest part, is to kind of go that other halfway and put some genuine thought leadership into it. And I'm not going to lie, LinkedIn is a big, scary place for that. So I understand the trepidation. And if it doesn't fit, find another community that does. For me, Reddit's a big part of my sales process. I mean, I've met prospects there. I've also met industry friends I meet up in places, right? So again, the value of putting yourself out there far outweighs the risk if you do it correctly. And not from, but the biggest mistake people make, and I think we can all agree on this, is leading with the commercial side first, maybe a little bit too much of the car salesman. And you should be more looking at the thought leadership and things that help everybody, the things that just help yourself.
Well, I'll accept your feedback in the spirit you give it, because I've actually been accused of that in my career. That,
oh, really?
Yeah. Well, and I mean it in a kind way, but I am now, I've learned, Michael, I've learned in the past, back in the early 2000s, when I had those small business server books and to a little extent a monopoly because there weren't other books. People, they saw me as I was always selling in to buy my book, right? And the way, but the way I've matured, here's what I found, and this would be more in line with Reddit in particular, is a little bit of the yin yang of the universe. Well, I guess LinkedIn, but what I found is I can publish my paid content over time, and it doesn't devalue my asset. If anything, it increases the value of my asset, the copyright in the book, because I'm trying to give to the universe. And it's almost like crowdsourcing a book, because you will get feedback. Yeah, you will get feedback on that chapter.
Yes. It goes that old idiom, if you want the right answer to a question, post the wrong one. Right? Yeah. It's the idea, if you say something people disagree with, and other studies have shown that disagreement activates the same nerve center in humans as physical pain, right? So that's why people get aggravated and they do those things. But
yeah, if the walls could talk, we sent out, and my fault, I approved the email, but we misspelled the word HIPAA. HIPAA is very easy to misspell.
Ooh.
And the open rate on the email soared. I mean, you should almost do that.
By accident, it actually turns out to be better sometimes.
Yeah, because people get all pissed off. Folks, we're going to move on. You got the point.
Harry, sorry to interrupt you. Yeah. But I did something I wanted to see. So actually, I looked up my SSI. That was by far the most interesting thing. And I'm a mere 4 points below you. So my personal goal for 2019 is to find a way to surpass you. I'm going to spend all day and all night working on it the rest of my life, but maybe one day it'll happen. Danny, did you happen to take a look at what your goal was?
I did.
What are you at?
I'm at top 1% for industry.
What's the number, though? That's what I want to know.
Hey, everything's a baseline. Everything's a baseline. Yeah,
I'll send it to you, because I think you're gonna have to catch up to me first before you get to Harry.
Oh, man.
No, but Michael, you raise a really, really valid point. Thank you, and please continue to interject. You raise a really valid point, because there is a friendly contest, and I don't know if it's alpha male or what the heck's going on up on Facebook, but Karl Palecek, well-known author, friend of ours. He will once a quarter, once a month, post up this screenshot. This is kind of where some of this came from. And he'll post up, and let's just say, and he's a go-getter. So let's just say he's a 78, right? And then within minutes, here comes Jay McBain from Forrester with his screenshot. Here comes Jay. And then here comes Harry. And it's a little bit like weightlifting and college sport, right? It's like, hey, I can bench 300. And I don't want to emphasize gender specificity, but I am a male. I'm competitive. I get it. Gamification, basically.
Gamification, correct.
So LinkedIn is your friend, and that is an update to my book, folks, because LinkedIn in 2003 was not a player. Mm-hmm. Moving on, the Minder section. So we just talked about Finder, which is how to get the business. Now we talk about Minder. Now, before I get into it, accolades to Jenny Hallmark, who is in her, what do you know, Jenny, 12th year with SMB Nation, rule of 12. And I hope that doesn't foretell any bad voodoo, but you are in your 12th year according to LinkedIn. And what I found, and it took me probably 12 years to figure it out, and then I hired Jenny, is that, you know, we can't do it all. It's very hard to be in professional services and master finder, minder, grinder. And what you tend to see is there's the management consultants or the MSPs in this crowd who are very good at sales. And then you have the MSPs that are very good at grinder, doing the work. I mean, they never met an H key inside Regedit and Windows Server that they didn't like. I mean, we got that crowd too. And then there's the minder. And when I was carrying the briefcase in the 90s for Clark Nuber, a regional accounting firm, and that was the basis of the book, basically, I love the finder and I love the grinder. And because we were owned by a CPA firm and they're very persnickety, that was the one blind spot I had in my business model was Minder. And so it takes me a while to learn my lessons. Got Jenny Hallmark on board a dozen years ago, and let's just say the trains run on time. With that said, Danny and Michael, I don't know if you want to do a quick DISC-like or Myers-Briggs self-assessment of your skills in those three quadrants. And you don't have to. This is a live broadcast.
Well, Michael's been loquacious at this moment, so I'll let him continue to keep talking.
Oh, actually, no, I will do that, but I will say that probably the greatest finder, one of the ones I've ever in my entire life is actually Danny Brown. So I'll go around and say he's one of the most prolific networkers I've ever met in my entire life out of all the guys in the industry I've known over the years. So
I would agree.
I'll go and call him that right now as revenge for him putting me on the spot. So I guess I'll go first. I think that my excellence, and it's funny because I remember I had a very old school sales boss that started in telecom in the 80s. And one day he liked to hit me with these logical proverbs about once every quarter where he'd just stop me, grab by the shoulders and say, Mikey, here's some really old guy advice. And I'd be like, great, thanks for telling me. And he looked at me and he said, you are a grinder and a minder. And I had no idea what that meant. So I went back to the computer and I Googled it and I was like, what's happening? Who am I? And I definitely say that it's a mix of two talents, which is to say that you're somebody that really knows how to build up the business once it's already done. And it's slightly different shit than being the finder, because the minder is a person that, you know, everything's through the door, we'll work on it, we'll make it figure out together. And that's why I love working with Danny's team so much, just on a personal level, is because Danny has a team of some of the best finders I've ever met. So to synergize well as a minder, that's what you got to do. You got to partner up. You have to self-assess the MSP and figure out what do you do best, right? If you're not the best sales guy, go find a great sales guy. If you're more of the guy that's going to go in there and help close it after it's done, figure yourself out. So if I was to give my assessment of myself, I would say probably about 20% finder, about 40% minder, and the remainder would be grinder.
Yeah. Hey, Jenny, can you come on mic because you're burning some well-deserved vacation time on a long weekend, but can you just come on and enjoy everybody's applause for a second and say hello to the audience? Do you mind?
Hey guys. Also, we got a question too, Harry, when you have a moment.
All right. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Harry, are you on Microsoft 365 or Office 365? If you're on Microsoft 365, how long have you been on it?
I am on Office 365 and just getting my arms around Microsoft 365, and our new community is emphasizing what I would call, I view it as 4 legs to that stool, the Windows, Office 365 security, and then compliance issues. And so we're on leg number 3 to start, which is security. No, that's a great question. Folks, sign up at M365 Nation, continue the dialogue, and you're going to see us weave that into the fabric over the next several weeks, especially as we come into Q2. Thank you, Jenny. And Jenny, enjoy that day off. I'm assuming you're river rafting out in central Washington in the 30-degree weather. Is that right?
Nice.
We're closer to 7-degree weather, so no, we'll be sledding instead.
All right. All right, let's do Minder. So folks, just like a realtor, well-known realtor, in fact, I'm going to get a well-known MSP author, love being on camera with my bookcase. So a lot of you are going to recognize the name Matt Makowitz from yesteryear when he had Ambition, Mission, and he did a book about selling. Talk about a finder. And life happened. Matt moved to Bainbridge Island, Washington from New Jersey, so we reconnected. And Matt decided in the Great Recession, and I totally get it, he transformed. He reinvented himself as one of the leading realtors on Bainbridge Island. And part of that transformation, and I really learned a lot from Matt, and I've used him professionally, part of that transformation is having 12 months cash on hand when you start out as an MSP or when you start out as a realtor. Because and there's a couple ways to have that cash on hand, but the bottom line is in the book, I have a crossover chart of expenses and effort relative to revenue, and you have and your cash burn rate. So you're burning cash, and then way out here you start to realize and recognize revenue, and better yet, recognize cash, not just accruals. So, gentlemen, I don't know, maybe this is a rhetorical question in your experience with the SureWeb Partner Program. I'm assuming you're attracting new people to the industry, but have you had this conversation that, guys, you got to drive Uber at night while you're getting your game on? Or, please, I don't know if you've had those sidebars.
We're always trying to find ways to make sure that we're a value-added consultant for our MSP partners. And it's not just giving them margin, it's actually helping them put together a total package. And sometimes when you're an individual owner, you start your own practice, you have to do other things outside of what you would normally like to do in order to make sure that the revenue's still coming in and you can keep the lights on. Especially if you have technicians on your staff, you have to make sure those technicians are paid. So there's always some wild and weird rules to get done. But one of the things we always tell people is sell the bundle, sell this total solution. We'll give you extra margin on the back end. We have MDF funds. We have multiple ways to help you keep the lights on so that you don't always have to drive the Uber at night.
Yep. And you know what, Danny, I'm going to come back to that on the 12% net profit margin about the bundle. That's my bundle talk. But why don't we jump a couple quick points to knock out. 12% fudge factor. Guys, we're dealing with some vendors ourselves right now on some redevelopment efforts, including launching M365. And we just went through this with our trusted advisor over in the web space, the guy named Ruben, who's helping us build out our sites. And sure enough, you have to have a fudge factor, right? You're dealing with professional services, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with change orders. So, Michael, I don't know if you want to append to that?
Oh, not at all. It's just, again, change, right? So that's being the telecom guy, that's 90% of my daily conversation. So factoring the fudge factor is really important. And actually, I didn't fully understand that going into this webinar, but now I'm starting to get the gist. So that's why the lights are on and I'm connecting the dots, as it were. But continue.
No, fair enough. Okay, the next 2 points are almost a little redundant, and apologies, guys. I should have worded this better, so I'm going to articulate it. So what I'm saying is a rule of 12 is that, and I really believe this, it's old school, and this is the antithesis of the analytics era where, we'll just run more media campaigns and bring in 50,000 leads and score them. Yeah, I mean, that's part of it, but you need the referrals. So 9 out of 12 leads need to be referrals. That's my typo. Referrals are from a happy client. And that at the end of the day, that's still foundation. That's not funny money on the West Coast called stock options. That's a Midwest family-owned manufacturer that's rock solid, baby.
Yeah.
And now, so 9 out of 12 new leads must be referrals. And then I am suggesting the funnel, that of those 12 referrals, I'm asking you to challenge yourself to convert 12 leads to clients. That's a conversion rate. Now, gentlemen, I know SureWeb appreciates analytics. I'm pitching high. Okay, I'm shooting for the moon, but I'm making a huge assumption that you had happy clients refer the lead to you, so you're already way down the sales funnel. Gentlemen, if you'd like to add to my math, because I know I'm pitching high.
Well, I think that I also, this part that I think Danny would be really, really good to set up is, and actually even I had a question for Danny. I was curious. When you owned an MSP, because that's what makes Danny so insightful on these subjects, because he's
Yeah.
been in the boots, which is most vendors never live that life, like myself included. Two questions, Danny. Number one, did you find the referrals were key? And what did you find was a reasonable close rate to those referrals, which is what I would like to know.
So the first thing I would tell you that referrals were key to driving growth in the business. As everybody knows today, the top 4 challenges most MSPs offer, number 1 is sales and marketing. How do you find more leads? That's very, very crucial. And the best way we did was have that referral program. And I would tell you, almost every single referral that we received closed. Almost 90% or more closed, because the referrals were for someone that they trusted. There was somebody they believed in, and they vouched for us. So we didn't have to tell our story anymore. Instant credibility. It helped close all the time.
Right. Next item. This is from the world of Karl Palecek, and I'll tell you how it played out. One fine day, and I mean, this is a long time ago. I can't even remember what client. Oh, yeah, the client was, let me back up. One fine day in the mid-decade, I was still carrying the bag part-time and doing the work with Small Business Server and loved it. And there was a medical clinic. Someone read my book, and down in the Bay Area, east of Oakland, as you start to get up, I'm going to say the hills and a little bit more rural. And so you go across the Bay Bridge and you go through Berkeley, Oakland, and you keep on going. And the guy had a cardiology clinic, and he wanted Harry. And so, I mean, he was paying my airfare and hotel to come down and wave my magic wand with a Small Business Server. Well, one fine day, he had grown. We got to a point where that wasn't feasible. And so I referred him to Karl Palecek in Sacramento, who was carrying the bag. And then I got a generous check in the mail unexpectedly from Karl. And money talks, and it's like, wow, I should do more of this. And it amounted to, it was kind of in the range of X% for first year revenue. I've upped that to 12%. If you're serious about recruiting new clients, this is what I would call, you can buy traffic. Okay, you can go out and buy this referral traffic. Hopefully it's only 12% of a finder's fee for first year revenue, and I would encourage you to restrict yourself to first year. Now, Michael, you're going to be able to draw better parallels from the sales agent community and the telecom community, because I think what I've heard in that world is they get a residual that's longer than 1 year. And I heard numbers at Channel Partners and IT Expo in past years throwing around a 15% revenue. Please, if you could help fill the gap.
Sure. So what makes telecom interesting is that there's kind of 2 factors at play. So factor number 1 is the upfront spiff, right? So as far as it goes for how you should plan to compensate people, is always dictated by the standard of the industry. So depending on how you price out your clients, so let's say if you go month to month and you're not really doing a contract, which of course we all don't recommend as people in the space, but you always want to go for the contract for your own safety. But if you don't, the standard is the first month is the paid out upfront sum, and then anywhere between for unrestricted contract, like 8 or 10%. If you start layering contracts onto this, though, so let's say we go up to a 3-year MSP agreement where you're locking in the end user on a per user fee, you're making your $800 per user, all the blended services together, which again is very conservative and light in some areas. Some people charge a lot more. They'll be expecting 3 times the first month, and an evergreen that's up to 15 to 20% instead. And this is the standard for telco. This is not me reinventing the wheel. And there's whispers of madmen in the industry now that are sending letters to the chief executives and master agents offering a 5-year term with a 5 times the first month's biff, right?
Yeah.
So we're going into a level where it's approaching things I've never even heard of before, you know, telecom gossip, but it's probably true.
Yep. Next item, 12% net profit. So back to Danny Brown. And Danny, this is from, so Karl Palecek gave a couple speeches at your conference up in Montreal. And just for the sake of giggles, your conference in Montreal this year is in October. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, that is correct.
Correct.
So I was there, you know, it was great. And in Montreal, fun town. And
we're already working on next year's.
Yeah. Well, we had that talk. Don't go to Vegas. Do not go to Vegas. Okay?
I remember we did have that talk, yeah.
You have a unique value proposition with Montreal. It's absolutely wonderful. But okay, so 12% net profit. So Danny, let me set the table and then have you comment from your time as an MSP, your time with Karl, and your own, you know, endeavors now. Karl is saying he goes around and does a workshop with a cloud bundle. And his speech is 70% margins because of these different factors. And I have permission. I just rewrote Jenny, I think that was chapter 12 in the new book. And I borrowed Karl's content with permission. Okay, so 70% gross margin. All right. Now, the reason I say you want to endeavor or strive for a 12% net profit is the 70% is a gross margin that then you have administrative costs, sales and marketing. I mean, you know, a lot of rules of thumb, 30% for sales and marketing in a normal organization. I'm suggesting a 12% write-off rate should be budgeted for. Good on you if you beat expectations, and you got to pay yourself adequately. If you're doing full cost accounting and you're being honest, I would offer the net profit, and this is the bottom line. And typically, the 12% net profit would go back into owner's equity or capital. And it's truly profit because you need that profit to innovate, right? You got to use that profit to then go fund other outside endeavors or engage in a diversified portfolio. So Danny, that's a really long setup of the table to talk about margins. And you hit on the magic of bundles if you want to catch what I'm throwing and maybe impart insights.
Exactly. Well, one of the things I always tell, and I'm glad you brought that up, one of the things I did at my business and the thing that we tell all of our partners today is that offer on your website, offer to your end user clients no more than 3 different bundles or 3 different offers, a small, a medium, and a large one, and list what you're going to offer. And so you don't want to put a price point on each of those offerings because customers are smart. They'll start pulling it out. And next thing you know, your 3-year contract at $200 per user per month wind up being $15 per user per month. And you're losing money because of headcount and overhead and everything else. So we always tell people to go ahead and put in your offering. Now, when you bundle correctly, as you stated, that the key is Office 365 is a commodity. It's out there. There's not really much margin you're going to make on that. But when you add up to 60% off for our UCAS solution, you add another 15 to 20% for additional services, another 45% for cybersecurity. By the time you add all these additional other offerings that gives your customer a true one-stop shop for IT services, you're going to have more than enough revenue generated after all your costs are done. And then once that is done, you have to first make sure you pay yourself so that you can stay fed and not hungry every day. And then secondly, you have to definitely reinvest that back into the business. And one thing I tell the MSPs, when you reinvest that back, make sure you set aside a percentage to reinvest back into the stuff that you're weakest at. And typically for most MSPs, they're the grinders. They know how to do anything inside and out with the networking or with the servers and things like that. So always invest in things that you're weak in, like sales and marketing, for example. So I like your overall thought process here, and it's true. That's exactly what we need to think about today.
Yeah, and when I think of portfolio diversification with investments, and I know I drive my community crazy about this, but I have outside interest. I've had these talks with both of you, but for example, last year, Mama Bear and I were empty nesters. Kids are in college. One's out of college. Seattle housing market. We sold the old time family home. And I am interested in, Danny, I mean, I've been very forthright with you, but my visits to Austin include looking at fixer flippers in the Austin market. Well, that's where it comes from, theoretically, right? It's coming out of some capital store that would allow me to diversify and do other things and fly, further and faster. But that's, again, I know that pisses off the SMB Nation audience to say, you're a heretic and you're disloyal to small business server. Sorry, guys.
No, it's just so funny because I believe the comments too.
Yeah, we have some good days and some bad days. Now, Danny, I might lean on you on this next one. As I rewrote my book, I finished chapter 12. I have a lot of curated content with permission from Karl Palecek. And when I wrote the original book, and again, if you came in late, a lot of people are going to recognize this doorstop, holds a door open. And but we talked about 1,200 billable hours a year. And this goes back to my experience as a professional services guy inside a CPA firm, where, we would argue that let's, again, just pretend there's 2,400 hours in a year that you can work, and you got to factor in vacation time, continuing professional education, sick days, etc., plus sales and marketing. And so the goal at Clark Nuber was a 50% utilization rate. And those were gravy days, so fortunately, I exceeded my billable hours goal, and you were incentivized with a bonus and yada, yada, yada. Now, Dan, that part's clear. But Danny, what Karl laid out in one of his works that I copy pasted was you still have to think this way. The one thing that no one can buy, it is limited in life, it's called time. And so, Danny, you still have to be mindful of time as an MSP with an MRR model. And I don't know if you want to try and explain it better, but time is not free. And there's a limited amount of time, even on an MMR with RMMs and whatnots, man.
That is true. I mean, time is definitely precious. I love how you talked about these billable hours. And one of the things for the old school techies, there's always this 3-year refresh cycle, right? 3 years refresh on the hardware, whether it be a SANs, whether it be laptops, desktops, printers, wireless systems, whatever it may be. And so we always built that into our contracts. Every 3 years, we'd go and replace all the equipment, replace all the hardware. And of course, those are billable hours. That's our time, that's our material, that's our energy. But also, we have to build in consulting hours. So we also build in, here's how technology evolved over the years, here's how things have changed. And we build that as an ability to find additional revenue streams, but also stay valuable to our partners, stay valuable to our customers, so they know that we're there with them as a partner. And it's not just a contract, it's more of additional ways that we can stay in there. Because if you're not in there, I guarantee you another MSP or someone else is trying to steal your customer. So you have to be in front of your customer at all times, any way possible. And if you can get paid for that, that's even better. So find other ways besides just having a standard MRR, your monthly recurring revenue that you do a 3-year contract with. Find other ways to stay relevant with your customer, and that's one of the things that has actually helped us over time.
And Harry,
Go ahead.
Would you be riffed of a plug that's very light but very
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So again, that's actually one of the values of something like Office Protect, which is just a little add-on that we throw in, free for 45 days with the Office 365 that we do, which helps you kind of get that proactive edge. Because when I think one of the biggest challenges I have talking with MSP partners, what Danny said is, proving that value again year over year. Because if you do your job correctly as a proactive MRR-based MSP, they're not talking to you very much, right? The trains run on time, everything is working, there's no outages, there's no major downtime, the servers are up and running, and the people are productive. So how do you prove that value year over year over year? And that's why I think the security aspect of it is becoming so key, and why something like a product that can let you know if there's logins from regions that the customer normally isn't has value, because you're proactively showing that I'm not just here collecting your money month to month, I'm actively engaged and I'm part of your business, because we're aligned. We want you both to do well. So that's kind of a big factor I find here that's missing, is how do you proactively show that value? Because you have to, because there's always someone else looking at your plate of food and thinking it looks real good at lunch, right? So be ready, be proactive.
Well, there's an off-color joke for all my single friends out there about Match.com that, I'll leave that hanging out there, but let's just say make sure you stay well groomed, you get to the gym, you know what I'm saying?
Eat some kale, all the things.
Actually, and closely related to relevancies, my final real point is explore new niches. My audience knows, gentlemen, that, again, I invest in some startups, and I take a lot of heat from that, from Mama Bear's family from Chicago that still thinks I would have been far better off when we got married to go to work for Sears Roebuck in the Sears Tower in downtown Chicago and still be there. I don't have the heart to tell them.
Fair enough.
Sears is gone, and I'm still here. But I do believe, I used to say 1 out of 10 startups failed until I did about a dozen startups, and only one has been, I'm very transparent. There's been one that made my career, and it's called SMB Nation. 2 examples of startups that did not work out. And again, it all makes sense at the beginning on the whiteboard, but we were investor backed with one called 1-800-Network in the early 90s, back when phones were a vanity brand. And the idea was network temps for NetWare and NT and so on. And we were backed by a really successful company out of Boston called Mac Temps. And good guys, didn't work. The other one my audience would know is Cloud Nation, that I did in 2011. And boy, howdy, I still feel that one on the balance sheet, but such is life, as the French say, or the French Canadians. And what is the, Michael, c'est la vie? What is the term?
Yeah, that's life.
Because, you guys are bilingual up there. But the point is, Michael.
Barely, but yes.
Well, the point is that, am I a better person with my business endeavors and my business acumen for the failure? Did I learn more from the failures of new? I absolutely did.
100%. Because
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, because, there's always a problem in the industry. And, I've worked a little bit around startups too, just because there's Dragon's Den, which is, a big thing. I've worked for companies that were funded by them before. And there's something to be said about somebody that's only ever had their one startup succeed, because you can tell. Because without their no man to tell them that the other 11 ideas aren't as good as the first original idea is how companies get run to the ground. You end up in an Uber situation, right? Where you have a CEO who's told everything was gold until it wasn't. Because if you only have one good idea, you're predisposed to thinking that all your ideas are the same quality.
Yeah, exactly. So we're exactly at time. Jenny, before you get out the door to go sledding and enjoy a well-deserved vacay, any questions we could knock out with the minute or two we have left?
We currently don't have any questions.
All right. Well, that's the way college professors like it, let me tell you. So, with that said, hey, Danny, and again, to all the ships at sea, but I will be at South by Southwest. And Danny, I am actually working on a way that apparently SAP, the German ERP company, is going to have an animal house down in Austin. And I hope you'll tag along. I see some fun. It's the dead ahead.
Give me a call. Definitely love to see you when you're down here. That's for sure.
All right, and Michael, thanks as always for the insights on telecom, and I mean that sincerely because you and I have talked ad nauseum that,
Oh, for sure.
dude, it's a journey. I mean, data and voice should be this. They should be
Mhm.
married, but it sometimes feels like we're still dating, brother.
Yeah, there's another Match.com joke in there somewhere for sure.
Just two nice people that should. No, I'm not gonna. All right. Well, folks, thank you very much. We will see you next week, and I would encourage the two guests today to, come on as attendees. But next week we're hitting 5G head on, and that will be the first time that we have presented that. So have a great weekend. Thank you very much, Jenny. Thank you, and enjoy your time off. Have a great day, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Excellent. Bye, guys.